For decades, scientists have known about the changes a warmer world would create. Now we're seeing those changes happen in real time. We can generalize those changes in the atmosphere as more extreme more often, which relates to events like hurricanes and floods and droughts and heat waves and cold snaps. But what about severe weather? Well, the answer isn't a simple one. To get a better perspective, I sat down with one of America's leading severe weather experts.
We don't really necessarily have really strong links physically figured out, but that we have some suspicions of things that are happening.
Harold Brooks was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. These days, he lives in Norman, Oklahoma, working as a senior research scientist for NOAA and the National Severe Storms Laboratory.
And when we think about tornadoes, what we've actually seen is if you look over long-term averages and we eliminate the F0 tornadoes that have changed a lot in their reporting and only look at the F1 and stronger tornadoes over the years, the average numbers of tornadoes per year, if you look on a decadal basis, has stayed about the same over the last 60, 70 years. It's about 500 a year in the United States. What has changed is that things have become more variable in the last 40 years.
When Harold mentions greater variability over the last 40 years, he's hitting on the topic of extremes.
We set a record from April of 2011 through March of 2012 for the most number of tornadoes that we'd observed in a 12-month period. And then from the next 12 months, we set the record for the fewest number of observed F1 and greater tornadoes immediately after it.
This map is a study showing tornado days year to year. What we see is a decrease in overall tornado days, but an increase in days with multiple tornadoes.
But we don't have all of the physical changes figured out. Why tornadoes why we might having more tornadoes on big days. It says there's probably a change in the shape of large-scale atmospheric waves, but that's really hard to figure out. And the biggest days still don't happen that often where we have really big statistics on them.
Harold also says these big days with tornado outbreaks are occurring over a greater surface area, but that doesn't mean we're getting bigger tornadoes.
One of the things we haven't seen change at all really is the intensity of tornadoes. That we don't really see much of a change as we go through time. That would probably take a very long time to see anything happening.
What about non-tornadic thunderstorms with damaging hail and destructive winds? This can be even more difficult to determine because the reporting database is limited, but Harold says there are signs. When it comes to hail,
there is some evidence that the largest hails, that we are getting more of the extremely large hailstones, but that's really tough to pick out of the database for sure.
And as for wind?
But I'm pretty confident based on what we've seen in the environment is that the non-tornadic wind events will increase in the future. That one seems to be the climate model runs and all that suggests that's going to be a much bigger problem by the end of the century than it is currently.
The conversation between Harold and I lasted an hour, where we went deeper into how our warmer world is changing the makeup of our atmosphere and patterns leading to some of the conclusions and hypotheses you just heard. Harold also shared with me some very interesting historic facts from tornadoes in St. Louis, including when the Cardinals played a doubleheader the day after a destructive tornado tore through the stadium and the city in the 1920s. You can read much more from our conversation along with other Show Me Climate stories at KOMU.com/climate.